Hello again, feral friends and fellow nature nerds, and thank you for tuning in to this Dirt Dispatch number 36. I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara. So, I started writing this episode about a completely different topic, but the next thing I knew, that topic had blown up into a full episode on its own. So, tune in next week to episode 108 of the Dispatches from the Forest podcast to hear all about a really cool insect. Instead, for this episode of Dirt Dispatches, I decided to tell you about the bird that I was going to include in the last episode of the Dispatches from the Forest podcast until that episode started getting too long. And that bird is the Belted Kingfisher. And on a side note to my darling wife, yes, there will be sounds, I promise. The Belted Kingfisher is a stocky, medium-sized bird that measures a little over a foot in length, about 30 centimeters, with a wingspan that's just a little bit less than that. And they weigh about 5 ounces, 142 grams. Like most kingfishers, and there's over 100 species worldwide, belted kingfishers have a large head and a shaggy crest with a long, heavy bill, longer than that of similarly sized birds. One of the best descriptions I read described them as top-heavy, which I think is apt. Their head looks just a little bit too big for their body, and that shaggy crest gives them a bit of a mohawk, punk rock kind of vibe. Both sexes have a slate blue back, wings, and head, a large white collar, a large slate blue band on its breast, and white underparts. But the females also have a reddish band across their upper belly that extends down their sides, which is kind of unusual. In most birds that display this type of what's called sexual dimorphism, it's the male that's the more colorful of the two. Belted kingfishers live and breed near calm bodies of water, so ponds, lakes, estuaries, marshes, etc., across most of the United States and Canada. And in fact, in most of their range, they're the only species of kingfisher. In the northern part of their range, they're partially migratory, leaving when the water freezes and going only as far south as necessary to find open water. In the southern part of their range, they're permanent residents. Now, the belted kingfisher is not a swimming or diving bird like a duck or a loon or a grebe or a cormorant. So why the need for open water, you ask? Well, the diet of the kingfisher is still mostly fish, hence the name. Although they'll also eat crayfish or other crustaceans, mollusks, insects, amphibians, reptiles, young birds, small mammals, and even berries. The kingfisher hunts by looking for prey from a perch overhanging the water, like a tree branch, a telephone wire, or a pier piling, or by hovering above the water. When it spots a fish or a crayfish near the surface, it dives with its eyes closed and grabs the prey with its bill. Then it returns to the perch, which it pounds the prey against before swallowing it head first. Interestingly, as nestlings, belted kingfishers have very acidic digestive juices to help them digest bones, fish scales, and arthropod shells. But by the time they leave the nest, their stomach chemistry has changed and they instead start to regurgitate pellets, kind of like owls or cormorants. And that's a good segue into the nesting and breeding habits of belted kingfishers. Belted kingfishers spend most of the year alone, pairing up during the breeding season. They're monogamous during the breeding season, but they form new pairs every year. Males and occasionally females establish territories, which usually conform to the shape of the stream or shoreline where they live. The male feeds the female as part of their courting, which, is pretty much the same way I courted my wife. Both members of the pair vigorously defend their territory by chasing away intruders, whether predators or other kingfishers, while giving loud rattle calls like this. On a side note, a small group of belted kingfishers is known as a rattle, or a concentration, or a kerfuffle of kingfishers. I like that. Kingfishers don't nest in trees or even tree cavities, and they don't nest on the ground really either. Instead, they nest in the ground. Belted kingfishers excavate burrows in earthen banks, usually avoiding ones with vegetation, especially trees whose roots, as anyone who's tried to dig a hole in the forest knows, get in the way of digging. They generally choose a bank near water, but they might use a ditch or a road cut, a landfill, a sand pit, or a gravel pit that's kind of far from water. The pair selects a nest site during courtship, usually high in the bank where it's unlikely to flood. The male probes the bank with his bill, flying back and forth to the female, who calls continuously from a nearby perch. When they've decided on a spot, both members of the pair take turns digging the burrow, although the males spend about twice as much time digging as the females. This process can take anywhere from 3 to 7 days, or sometimes longer, to complete. When finished, though, the burrow extends 3 to 6 feet, 1 to 2 meters into the bank. It slopes upward to help prevent flooding and ends in an unlined chamber 8 to 12 inches in diameter, about 30 centimeters, and 6 to 7 inches, or about 15 centimeters high. If the entrance to the burrow should happen to flood, this chamber will provide an air pocket that should keep the chicks from drowning. During the breeding season, a layer of undigested fish bone scales and arthropod skeletons, courtesy of the parents, can accumulate, which actually provides a certain degree of insulation to the burrow. Kingfishers sometimes nest among bank swallows, especially in human-made habitats. In fact, swallows might try to nest in the entrance to the kingfisher burrow, but the kingfishers go in and out so frequently that they tend to drive the swallows away. Predators of kingfishers include hawks, small mammals, and snakes. When a belted kingfisher suspects an intruder is around, it might land on a perch and heave its body up and down with its crest elevated, or fly back and forth along the water, rattling noisily until the intruder leaves. If threatened, it might scream, spread its wings, and raise the patch of white feathers next to each eye. Overall, belted kingfishers are pretty common and widespread, but between 1966 and 2019, their populations declined by just under 1% per year. Doesn't sound like much, but that's a cumulative decline of 38%. But still, they're considered a species of relatively low conservation concern. At one point, kingfishers were hunted and trapped, especially near fish hatcheries and trout streams, to prevent them from eating the fish. But migratory bird conservation laws have thankfully made this illegal today. Now, compared to other fish-eating birds, belted kingfishers seem to be relatively unaffected by environmental contaminants, probably because the small fish they prey on tend to accumulate lower levels of toxins. The big thing that limits kingfisher populations is the number of earthen banks available for nesting, and some populations have grown and spread thanks to human-made sand and gravel pits. They are, however, sensitive to disturbance and may abandon territories if people start frequenting the area. So, there you go, feral friends, the belted kingfisher. Next time you find yourself near water, keep an eye out. Maybe you'll see one. If you're interested in supporting the podcast, well, that would make me really happy. Here's some ways to do that. Become a patron. Subscriptions start at just $5 a month. A bargain. Plus, with 3 paid months, you get some sweet Dispatches from the Forest merch. Find out all the details at patreon.com/dispatchesfromtheforest. You can donate through PayPal with my email address, dispatchesfromtheforest@gmail.com, or you can use my email address as, an email address. It's the best way to contact me if you have a question, a comment, or a request for a future episode. I've had a few people ask about just sending a check, and that's not a problem either. Use that email address and send me a message, and I'll let you know where to send the check. You can also donate using the Cash App and the hashtag ForestNerd. How about getting some merch? Go check out the merch store at cafepress.com/shop/dispatches from the forest. Click on products and find something you like. Finally, follow Dispatches from the Forest on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara, reminding you to go outside and get dirty. Dirt Dispatches is a production of Dispatches from the Forest and may not be used or rebroadcast whole or in part without express written permission.